What's up, people? I'm Shaggy the Opinionated Hippie, and this is part 69B of my reviewing and ranking Frank Zappa's guitar solos within the context of an album. That album being Halloween 77, which came in this little thing. 6 shows, all on this little USB drive. USB drive, is that what it's called? Yeah, they're all in here. Yeah, little Oh Punky's bar. Don't eat it. It's fun size. It is fun. And this is show number 2, 1028, the late show. I'm going to do each of the shows separately, then sort of rank the shows and then rank the solos in the final video. Though I'll let you know where I stand on shows. And the first show was great, with a couple absolutely fine, excellent solos. But I think solo per solo almost, this show is just like a whole other level is reached. We're already on like a great level. Like, to me, Fall 77 is leading into what would be his best run of guitar solos years. I don't think he's quite there yet. But the sort of creativity in these solos, the exploration, his pretty wide use of effects, but I think well done to make really interesting, aggressive, adrenalized sounds is all really fantastic. And then the rhythm section, O'Hearn and Boz Bozio are just ridiculous. They have this plotting that they sometimes establish that Frank plays off so incredibly well. This show is fantastic guitar solo-wise. Same exact set of guitar solos from the first show. That's the case with most of these shows. I'm going to talk from my favorite, from favorite to least favorite to favorite. Put them up on the screen at the end, and then I'll show you where this show ranks compared to the first show. I already give it away. This show's better than the first show. I can save putting that up there. I think early show, late show, Frank had a lot more cigarettes and a lot more coffee, and he is feeling good. Number 7 is Muffin Man. Yeah, it's just an absolutely great Muffin Man. Really nice, almost patient setup. Like, Baloo sounds great. Baloo's little short solo before Frank comes in, and then they all kind of really lay into the riff. And then when Frank comes in, he does this 2-note, like, it's almost like the guitar screaming, like, I'm here! And then he just, like, takes off. Like, it's a very forceful, determined entry. Drops a really nice Muffin Man solo, introduces the band, talks to the audience, and closes out with a really strong solo. It's what you would expect from a Muffin Man. It is fantastic. Energy is amazing. But everything else on here is just better. Number 6 would be Leather. A much shorter than the Muffin Man. This is his sort of jazzier, gentler side. I love this solo. I just love that it happens in the song. I love that it's Frank for like roughly a minute. Keeping it short, but not like your standard like blues, like a bamboozled or NBiz type solo, but this nice, almost prog jazzy, intricate solo. This one has this little emotional, maybe for like 4 bars, it gets a little emotionally sort of like almost bluesy for a while, and a little bit of emotion seeps in. I think this one is slightly more interesting than the one from the previous show. But yeah, great solo. Number 5, Punky's Whips. This Punky's is just a lot of space early on. Like, Frank will play a note and then just not play, and then play some notes and not play. And it gives, like, I think it's Mars that gets a couple like sort of these keyboard injections, like when he realizes, okay, Frank's kind of leaving space for us to interject things in. And I think Mars is the one that takes advantage of and puts these little keyboard bursts in there that you normally wouldn't think are a part of Muffin Man, which I think is really cool, or Punky's Whips, which I think is really cool. It's just really tasty. It's very deliberate. It's very just seems to go on for quite a while. It's just you're a typical sort of like, to me, like the Punkies and Muffin Man almost have the same sort of attack, and like Frank knows it's probably going to be the end of the set, so he wants to like really just build things up before you take that little break. This one doesn't have that same sort of attack. Frank seems to be like, what else can I do with Punkies that I haven't done before? And so it just really makes for really interesting whips. And eventually it gets that energy and, reaches a really nice, satisfying climax. Number 4 is The Torture Never Stops. Personally, my favorite tortures are Winter 78. I think Frank almost reached a certain level of perfection with that version of Torture Never Stops and those solos. The ones in Fall 77 tend to be a tale of two halves, which is why I rank them lower than Winter 78. You got this first half, which is Frank, like what he would do in early Zoodalures, what he would do in like Dupree's Paradise, what he would do in kind of almost like in Wild Love, where it's just kind of a little airier, a little spacier, a little more delicate. He's not really getting into a little more distortion, or he's, the tone is not very aggressive. It has this sort of light airiness about it, a lot of just kind of gentle chords, like Jerry strumming chords type things like that. And then there's usually a shift somewhere in the middle where we get to the more aggressive sort of torture where O'Hearn and Bozier are just plodding away at the back and like keeping this just sort of relentless, like almost like drum beat of like punishment in the back, with O'Hearn, dancing all over the place, and every once in a while Terry just dropping in some random fill. And it's usually a shift. And a lot of times I don't think those two halves have much in common. That's exactly the case of this solo. It is the tale of two halves. There is a dramatic shift in the middle, about 3 minutes in, but both halves are pretty fantastic. Like it's just really slow the first 3 minutes, really patient. Like it almost feels like we're not even going to have that shift and that we're already at that point where this is the way it's going to be and this intensity is going to build. But the shift happens. He drops in and hits a pedal. We get a lot more intense. And then he just starts screaming and going after, and like the rhythm sections just pounding away. And it's just like you get this absolutely intense second half. I would rank it higher if it wasn't that like, hey, we're just going to shift gears and do this. If it was more of a steady thing. That's my one. It's not a complaint about these solos because both halves are absolutely fantastic. It's just, if I'm going to rank solos, this is my reason for putting it at 4 instead of higher. Number 3, City of Tiny Lights, which is just pure adrenaline. It's just Frank is in pure, it's not even attack mode. He's just going somewhere quickly. Lots of use of all kinds of like effects early on, like pedals that are just like, it sounds like it's sound upon sound, and maybe we have some like some flange and some delay, but then we drop that and throw. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but it works. It works with the energy of this version of City of Tiny Lights. It works with that sort of like just, again, sort of plodding death vamp that this solo has. It's nasty. There's a lot of him just being like very staccato and like just attacking in this just like doesn't know how to control himself type manner. Like it's not the most, like I think the Torture Never Stops solos is both halves are probably better constructed journeys from A to B, but this one is just like a rush of like drinking like 5 Red Bulls in a row and be like, I got to do stuff for like 2 minutes. Let me do it. And it's fun. It's like a really, really fast, wild, like roller coaster ride. Torture Never Stops is maybe like a long wooden one with a couple of big drops, and the whole thing is just like this awesome journey. Like City of Tiny Lights is like it's a 45-second roller coaster ride, and you don't get to catch your breath the entire time. There's no scenery looking. You're never waiting for the drop. The entire thing is the drop. Yeah, great solo. Number 2 is Wild Love. Variations on the Squirm. One of the solos I've probably listened to more than any other is Bowling on Sharon. Off Transfusion, which is the Squirm from the previous show. It's really interesting to revisit these squirms and like the variations on this one. This one seems to squirm a lot more, like this like really fast, just playing with that type melody, that idea. But then as the solo develops, it really doesn't go into that sort of yo mama build that some of these go into, but it goes into this more like, seems like this emotional, like gentler playing that has a little bit more spaciness, but there's a moment where it seems like I think it's Bozio and maybe O'Hearn are both trying to like do it and like get under Zappa in a way and like build it up to like this epic ending. And it almost seems like Zappa refutes that, and it just becomes this like, I don't know, more like emotionally resonant or almost like spiritually infused solo that like it doesn't want to get that swell, doesn't want to get that volcanic peak because it's just a more of a linear, I don't know. It's a really neat take on this squirm idea and what Frank would do with these solos in this entire run. I don't know if it's better than the Bowling on Sharin. I just gave them the same score because they're both absolutely fascinating, or at least not the Bowling on Sharin, but the Wild Love version of that from the previous show, which was fantastic. But this one, it is really neat to compare the two and just see what Frank does with pretty much the same jumping off point. Now he kind of goes in two different ways. But that would be the number 2, Wild Love, which is just fascinating listen. And number 1, which is just, it's just like 8 minutes of Frank perfection, is the Conehead solo. The previous show, we get about minute plus of like that vamp before Frank comes in and solos. About 30 seconds in, Frank's playing that vamp like on his guitar. And so the whole thing has quite a heavier feel from the beginning, and Frank seems a little more invested in it. And when he starts off his solo, it's just kind of like he just like sails off. Like he's on the ground with us going dun 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 dun. And then at one point he's like, okay, I'm going, bye. And he just kind of flies away and does these like aerial guitar feats in the sky above us, and they're beautiful and they look effortless. And meanwhile, the band below is going dun 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 dun, like keeping it grounded. And then things get weird in the middle. And then he has this part where he just starts doing this like light trilling. And then at one point, it's almost like he's like, I'm just going to attack now for like 3 minutes. And he gets a lot more like determined, and like it's almost like he goes on like this 3-minute rant, but it's focused and it's honed in. And then he starts doing these really crazy metal runs, which is almost like do like crazy stuff right around the 6-minute mark, and things get more aggressive. Yeah. And then the end, he's just kind of chugging away. Like this is just an epic 8 minutes with Frank on guitar. And he's playing. He's doing anything he wants to do. The solo doesn't really have this sense of like going from point A to point B, but it's just like you're just in this room with Frank for 8 minutes, and he's going to do all these different things on guitar. And underlying, you just have this support system that is just always there going dun 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 dun. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. It's really like it's definitely like no other solo in this show. It's just there's a freedom here. There's just like, even though we're tied to that vamp, it just seems to like set up the musical environment in a completely different way than a lot of other things where Frank is just going off. Like a Them or Us. Them or Us seems more tightly controlled, like dun like you got to hit these points when we come down. You got to address us. This is like, we're just here. Dun dun. You do whatever you want. Interact with us or don't. We're going to keep it real. And Frank's just doing, it is an absolutely fascinating 8 minutes. The Conehead from the first show is amazing. This one just seems to be just even more carefree and out there and just, it's absolutely beautiful. That's what they look like in typewritten form. Just a ridiculously good show. Better than the first show, I would say, and setting the bar quite high for the shows to come. Let me know your thoughts. Appreciate the ones from the first video. Thank you. Yeah, let me know your thoughts on this, solos, all that kind of stuff. Subscribe, like, share, comment, do all those things, and go listen to the show because it is ridiculous. Peace. Talk to you later.